Chapter 4. At first, Chapman proved difficult to find. He ought to be around here somewhere, said Daisy, crossly, popping in and out of doorways on the first floor like a jack-in-the-box. Oh, hello, Chapman. Chapman was in Lord Hastings' bedroom, standing on wobbly tiptoes at the window and dusting. He jumped at Daisy's voice, and the duster fell out of his hand and clattered on the floor. Hello, Chapman, said Daisy. How are you? Very well, Miss Daisy, he replied automatically. We want to ask you a question, said Daisy. It's about Mr. Curtis. Chapman swayed, his face creasing up as though he had been hurt. He looked just as frightened as he had in the kitchens earlier. Who else have you been talking to? He cried. What have they said? No one, said Daisy. It's only that Daddy's been in such a funny mood since, and I'm terribly worried that he's got a silly idea in his head that he had something to do with what had happened. Of course I know he didn't. You must have seen it. Can't you reassure him? Chapman went bone white. He was shaking too. He looked as if he were about to break apart. I didn't see anything, he whispered. Not a thing. I didn't look and I couldn't have seen. Daisy looked puzzled. But, Chapman, don't be so silly. You must have. I didn't see anything, Chapman repeated. And if I did, well, that man was purely wicked. Sometimes the truth doesn't make things better. Now, out of this room at once. Daisy flushed with annoyance. It's not fair of you, Chapman, she cried. I'm not saying anything more, said Chapman resolutely. Go on, go away. I've got work to do. Daisy went pink, then white, then pink again, and she turned and rushed out of the room. We hurried after her, but we were barely halfway across the first-floor landing when Lord Hastings himself came panting up the main stairs, exactly as though he'd been summoned. He gave us all a distracted wave, then darted off into his bedroom. Ah, Chapman, we heard him say, just the man I wanted to see. Daisy paused, then she turned to me. Quick, she hissed. We have to listen in. Ought we to? Asked Beanie in concern. I didn't see anything, Chapman repeated. Oh, sorry, wrong page. Of course not, said Daisy, but I've told you before that's the point of detection. She crept closer, right up to the door, which in his hurry Lord Hastings had not managed to close properly. I wanted to back away again, but Daisy's hand was round my wrist, and I knew I had to stay to hear what she was about to hear. Wanted to clear up any misconceptions that might have. That is, Chapman, old thing. What I'm trying to say is that if you did see anything at the tea that might have given you cause for concern, anything that It never happened, sir, said Chapman. There was nothing to see. Yes, said Lord Hastings, his voice warm with relief. That's it exactly. Nothing happened, nothing to see. And that's what you'll say should anyone ask? That is what I will say, sir. Good man, excellent man. It's above and beyond, Chapman, simply above and beyond everything. This shan't be forgotten. Sir, if I may, I shall forget it immediately, said Chapman. May I go, sir? We all jumped back automatically, all except Daisy. She simply stood there, eyes blank. Hide! I hissed, because someone had to do something, and Daisy seemed to have frozen up completely. We all dived in different directions, and I ended up in the alcove behind the stuffed owl, right arm linked with Daisy's, and dizzily breathing in dust from the curtain. Lord Hastings' heavy feet went thundering across the landing and then down the stairs, followed a few moments later by Chapman's soft, precise steps. We were alone. I thought again about what we had just heard. Lord Hastings asking for Chapman's help, making sure he didn't tell anyone what he had seen. It fitted horribly with our recreation. Had Chapman seen Lord Hastings slipping something into the cup before he handed it to Mr. Curtis? I did not want it to be true, but what else was I to think? Daisy, I said thickly because of my heart and the curtains, your father. Oh, I know, Daisy whispered, coming back to herself with a twitch. Her voice was falsely bright. I could tell that she had decided to keep on pretending. The old silly's done something and he doesn't want to be found out. Isn't Chapman a brick? But, oh goodness, said Daisy, it won't be about the murder, Hazel. Don't be a chump. I've said it before, Daddy wouldn't do it. I realised that Daisy's incredible calm about the case was really just another front. She could pretend to suspect her brother and her mother and her uncle, and I don't think she even minded about suspecting her great-aunt. But she was only playing when it came to Bertie and Lady Hastings and Uncle Felix. She wouldn't even play about her father. There were some thoughts that she refused to let in, and although I was achingly sorry for her as a friend, as a detective, I knew that she simply had to face up to them. Daisy, I thought to myself, was not going to ruin this case because she didn't like the way it was going. As I decided that, something pinged loose inside me, like a button popping off a tight skirt. I took hold of Daisy's shoulders and pulled her round to face me. "Yes, he would," I cried. "He would just as much as anyone. We know he didn't like Mr. Curtis, and he knew about Mr. Curtis and your mother. We saw him arguing with Mr. Curtis yesterday morning. And I saw him, Daisy. I saw him hand the cup of tea to Mr. Curtis. He's the most likely of anyone to be the murderer. I didn't want to believe it, but now, after what we've heard, we have to." Daisy opened her mouth. There was an angry flush across her cheeks. "How dare you, Hazel?" she said. "I'm your vice president," I said. "I have to say it. No one else will. And if you don't listen to me, you're not being a proper Detective Society president." As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I knew that I had said something very wrong. "Get out of my way," hissed Daisy. "Take your hands off me." "But don't you know—" "Of course I know, you idiot," she shrieked. "Why couldn't you have let me pretend?" She threw herself at me. I staggered, the curtain ripped, and I fell backwards, heavily onto the landing, Daisy half on top of me. "I'm going to the nursery," she said. "Don't bother to follow me." Then she scrambled to her feet and dashed away up the stairs, golden plaits bouncing behind her. Beanie and Kitty had crawled out of their hiding places, and they were staring at me with almost identical expressions of horror. "What happened?" whispered Beanie. "Is Daisy all right?" "I told her that Lord Hastings might be the murderer," I said. "Cruel," said Kitty, "but true." "Don't," I said. I was in no mood for Kitty's nasty side. "Oh, all right, Hazel Wong," said Kitty, holding up her hands. "What do you propose your precious Detective Society does now that Daisy's gone off in a sulk?" I took a slightly wobbly breath. What were we to do? I said, "We're going to..." And then we heard the most terrible crash. Chapter 5. The three of us went running down the stairs, me wondering if it was particularly wise to run towards a noise when there was a murderer on the loose. There were no more smashes after the first one, but I realised it had come from the kitchens. Beanie hung back, shaking her head in fear, and I knew that with no Daisy, I would have to give the orders. "Come on," I said to her encouragingly. "We have to see what it is." We went into the kitchens. Hetty was standing there, arms up to her chest. Broken crockery lay scattered around her feet, and Mrs. Docherty was next to her, open-mouthed. They were both staring fixedly at the pile of dirty china beside the washing-up bowl. "I'm not going mad," said Hetty to Mrs. Docherty. "I'm not." "You certainly are not," said Mrs. Docherty firmly. "Oh, what is it?" whispered Beanie. "Is it something awful?" Mrs. Docherty turned and saw us. "Girls," she said. "Goodness, isn't Daisy with you?" "She's not feeling well," I said hurriedly. "What's happened?" Said Hetty. "Well, all the teacups from the goods set, they're still in the dining room, and the dining room is locked, and has been since yesterday. But look at that!" And she pointed to the pile of washing up. We all squinted. The cups resting on top of each other looked very much like cups to me, until I saw that one of them was thinner than the others and fluted, with a fine band of gold around its rim and more on its sides. "It's one of the goods set in here," Hetty said. "I don't understand it. It's impossible, but there it is. I shouldn't have dropped my tray, but it was the shock. You see, I'd been thinking about what happened all day, and then suddenly there was a reminder in front of me, and I don't see how it could have got there." Of course, I saw. There was only one explanation. The murderer must have slipped into the kitchens when Mrs. Docherty and Hetty were out and put the cup amongst the washing up where they hoped no one would notice it. Lord Hastings had been downstairs just now, I remembered, and we had seen him coming up to his bedroom to speak to Chapman. "What's all this? What's all this?" boomed a large voice behind us. It was Lord Hastings again. Beanie flinched and stepped back into Kitty, and I clenched my fists at my sides. After what we had overheard, I couldn't help it. If he really was the murderer, all his jolly goodness suddenly seemed like a lie. "Is everything all right? What have you broken this time?" he said. "It was another rat, sir," said Mrs. Docherty composedly. "Hetty was startled and she dropped a tray." "Good grief, is that all? I should have thought you'd be used to them by now. Back up, Hetty." "Yes, sir," said Hetty. "I'm sorry, sir, it's a phobia." "Goodness," said Lord Hastings, "phobias. Don't believe in them myself. New Age mumbo-jumbo. But still, don't do it again, eh?" "No, sir." said Hetty. Lord Hastings withdrew. We all heard him say to someone in the hall, Hetty saw a rat. Says she has a phobia. We all breathed again. Phobia, said Mrs. Docherty. I agree with Lord Hastings. But it is odd all the same. I don't blame you for being shocked. Where is Daisy? It's not like her to miss a bit of excitement. She's not feeling well, I said again uncomfortably. I'll go and see her now. I left Beanie and Kitty in the kitchens. They would be safe with Mrs. Docherty, I decided, and I went upstairs alone. Some talks are for best friends only. Did I?